Well, you finally arrived, the final Nugget movie of this ITIL Nugget series. This movie is going to be a little short and sweet as we look at security management. Now, why do I say short and sweet? Well, the truth of the matter is, and ITIL recognizes this, security is a huge area. And there are other certifications like SSCP, CISSP, and Cisco's CCSP that do wonderful jobs at certifying security professionals. So this nugget's not going to be a nugget on how to implement or configure security in your organization, by no means. We're going to talk about the very important role of security management and how it works with the other IT services of your organization. In this nugget on security management, we're going to look at 5 key knowledge areas. First of all, we'll get the big picture of security and talk about some basic fundamental terminology. Then, we'll look at security controls and the importance of implementing these in your organization. We'll look at the security management process. We'll discuss security and the service level agreement, and then finally investigate some costs and possible pitfalls of security management. We want to start out kind of looking at the big picture and refamiliarizing ourselves with some terminology, some concepts we've briefly alluded to already in this Nugget series, and some things you're probably already aware of based on your security experience. We want to look at what are some of the main topics, some of the main concerns of our written security policy and security management. Well, first of all, we want to look at the different categories of threats. Different threats and vulnerabilities in our organization. And they break down into really 4 different categories. First of all, you have threats that are external. These are threats that come from the outside by people either we know, people we don't know. These are typically attacks at our perimeter routers or our perimeter firewalls. Attacks that try to penetrate our wireless networks, for example, from outside of our building, possibly using modems through our phone lines. Any point of exit or egress out of our organization represents a vulnerability for external threats. Now, these external threats come in 2 categories. You have what are called unstructured threats and structured threats. Unstructured threats are basically curious users, individuals just running curiosity programs to find out if we have any, what our IP addressing scheme is, accidentally coming upon our web servers, things like that. They weren't really planned or premeditated. Structured threats, however, are structured attacks, people trying to get into our network using IP spoofing techniques, denial of service attacks on our servers, doing reconnaissance attacks to find out information so they can do further attacks on our networks. These are planned malicious attacks. So we need to be aware of the 2 different types of external attacks. Then we have internal attacks, and studies have shown us that 70 to 80% of the attacks on our network are actually internal. And we think about attacks on our network so often coming from the outside, from that hacker out there. But technically speaking, 3/4 of the attacks are going to come from inside of our network. Many of these will be unstructured. In other words, users just going beyond their capabilities or their permissions, accessing folders and directories that they shouldn't access, introducing rogue hardware or software accidentally, doing things that are illegal in our security policy. For example, accessing websites like gambling sites or adult sites or sports sites, downloading adware or spyware or illegal programs that introduce Trojan horse malware into our organization. Then, of course, there's the structured threat, the individual in our organization who does a planned threat against our system. Think about, for example, that movie Office Space, if you've seen that movie, and the program that the 3 guys actually put on the floppy disk and introduce into the system that shaves off, a few pennies here and there and puts them into a checking account somewhere. That's a structured, planned threat against our network. And again, these could be full-time employees, but more often than not, internal structured threats are going to come from contractors, okay? Contractors, temporary employees, visitors into the building. So other types of security mechanisms like authentication, access control, and physical security are all very important. Now, our goal in a security policy and our goals as security management is to really guarantee three, possibly four key aspects of security. And that is something you need to be aware of. It's confidentiality, its integrity, its availability, and possibly non-repudiation. Well, the big three of security from a security management and security policy standpoint is CIA. No, it's not Culinary Institute of America or Central Intelligence Agency. It's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. This is the benchmark for evaluating information system security. These are the three goals. Now, there's one more fourth goal here, and we'll talk about that separately. But confidentiality refers to limiting access to information and preventing the disclosure of information and data to unauthorized users. And the foundation of confidentiality is authentication methods and cryptographic methods, user IDs, passwords, encryption, all the way up to biometrics, like voice recognition, iris scanning, facial recognition, and everything in between. The goal here is to uniquely identify a data system's users and support control methods that control and limit the user's access to the system resources. Also critical to confidentiality here are protecting against things like malicious software or malware, spyware, email spam, instant messaging spam, and email phishing attacks. Why? Because these kind of attacks can be precursors to introducing software that can break down confidentiality of systems. Confidentiality is closely related to a broader concept, that being data privacy. You often hear privacy and confidentiality used synonymously. Now, data integrity refers to the trustworthiness of data or information resources. In other words, making sure that data hasn't been changed inappropriately, whether deliberately, through malicious activity, or by accident. It also includes origin or source integrity, making sure that the data actually came from the person or component or entity that you expected to come from, instead of an imposter or instead of someone doing a man-in-the-middle attack. Integrity also takes into consideration the concept that a person or entity in question put in the right information. That is, does the information reflect the actual circumstance? Integrity of information systems typically include the preservation without corruption of whatever data was transmitted into the system. The third pillar is data availability. Now, earlier we had an entire nugget movie on availability management, so you're very well familiar with the concept of availability of systems, availability of IT services. But from the security standpoint, we're talking about availability of system resources, information resources. An information system that's not available, like a server, for example, when you need it, is basically like not having a server at all. And it could be worse if it affects your entire IT infrastructure. Now, data availability may not be so much a security issue as it is a technical issue. A computer malfunction, a server malfunction, the network being down, natural phenomenon like a storm, a thunderstorm, or a tornado, or it could be human-related, human causes, either accidentally or deliberate. Techniques like denial of service attacks, however, can flood servers to affect their availability. And when it comes to availability, technically, human beings are the weakest link. Now that's CIA, so our security policy and our security management really has to almost guarantee that we're going to be able to deliver these three pillars. But there's also one other aspect of security, and that's what we call non-repudiation. Non-repudiation is actually a pretty broad concept. It basically ensures that a contract can't be denied or repudiated at a later date by either one of the parties. It's basically the opposite of what we call plausible deniability. Now, when it comes to security, non-repudiation simply means that it can be verified that the sender and the recipient were in fact the parties who claimed to send the message and receive the message respectively. Or to put it differently, non-repudiation of origin proves that data has been sent, and non-repudiation of delivery proves it's been received. On an escalating basis, digital transactions are highly subject to fraud. For example, because of Trojan horse infections or virus infections or systems with man-in-the-middle attacks. So non-repudiation can put in place, especially with e-commerce and online finance and contracts being done, on the internet over large geographic areas. It puts into place with cryptographic methods a way to verify that both parties are who they say they are and that neither one can deny that the actual contract or transaction took place. Here's some more key terminology, some areas you should take some notes on. First of all, a threat. A threat is anything that can exploit a vulnerability. And of course, a vulnerability is a weakness in a system or your network security or data security. A threat is any potential cause of an incident that could be considered to be a threat. For instance, a fire could be a threat because it could exploit the vulnerability of flammable materials. Or a reconnaissance attack could be a threat because it could exploit the vulnerability of systems and data that don't have confidentiality mechanisms. The term threat applies to information security management and IT service continuity management, but it also applies to other areas like problem management and availability management. A threat agent is typically an individual, a hacker, internal unstructured or external structured or vice versa. It's a hacker taking advantage of a known vulnerability. Any intruder to an unauthorized system is a threat agent. A risk is the likelihood of a threat occurring. It's the possibility and the probability that the threat agent will actually end up exploiting the current vulnerability. For example, if your web servers have ports that are open to the internet without any firewall protection, then you have a high probability of a threat agent taking advantage of the situation, compromising your web servers. A vulnerability, as I've explained, is a weakness in a system. This threatens the confidentiality, the integrity, the availability, and the non-repudiation of an asset. For example, a Windows 2003 Exchange server without hotfixes and security patches applied to it. That would be a vulnerability. Exposure is a scenario where you're exposed or you're open to potential losses from a threat. For instance, if your system's been compromised by a hacker and then you've had critical files deleted or copied, then you've been exposed and a loss has occurred. A countermeasure is also known as mitigation. These are controls that are put in place to counter against potential loss, like firewalls, intrusion detection, intrusion prevention systems, strong password management, a Kerberos key management system, physical security, security guards, closed-circuit television, and virtual private networking. Another key to security management is understanding that the ITL recognizes 4 different categories of security controls. First of all, there's organizational controls. These controls provide clear responsibility, clear individual roles, and procedures for reporting that are going to coordinate with the business needs and the needs of IT infrastructure. Critical to organizational controls are the separation of duties and accountability for specific processes. Organizational controls are typically concerned with what do you do and how do you report it. Physical controls limit access to the facilities, to the building, to the campus. This includes surveillance cameras, security guards, and physical intrusion detection systems. Providing a layered approach to physical security is highly recommended. Think of physical controls as anything that can be felt or touched. Technical controls, on the other hand, are often logical. These are used to augment the ability of individuals to implement the organizational, physical, and soon-to-be-defined procedural controls. They also serve to protect technical systems from technology-based intrusions. These can be things like access controls, multi-factor access systems, for example, like your ATM card, something you have, your card, and something you know, your PIN number. This could also include a Kerberos ticketing system for security with access to servers and server processes. Procedural controls, on the other hand, include policies, standards, of course procedures, and general guidelines. This would be change management, release management, configuration management processes, a written security policy. Procedural controls are the defined rules for conducting your day-to-day business activities. All of these controls should be used together in concert to create a layered security approach for information security. And as a security manager, you have to make sure that these things are put in place in your organization or in your business or for your customer. You should also approach security controls from the standpoint of 3 different categories being preventative, detective, and corrective. Preventative controls are often referred to as reduction controls. These are put in place way in advance. They're designed to reduce the likelihood of potential incidents. These can be allocation of access rights and control of access rights to files and directories and systems, to the implementations of full-blown cryptographic controls, for example, IPsec. It can also include carrying out regular data and software backups to developing and testing IT service continuity plans, preventative controls, or reduction controls. The second category is detective controls. These are also referred to as repression controls, and this is the handling of actual security incidents and minimizing the negative aspects on your business of these incidents. This includes monitoring, event alert systems, logging, virus checking, blocking user accounts after, let's say, a predefined number of failed login attempts, enforcing password history and password strength, things like that. Detective or repressive controls. The third category of security controls is correction or corrective or recovery controls. These will be put in play when all the other controls have failed. This is your kind of fail-safe method. They're concerned with restoring data and software backups as quickly as possible or implementing other fallback techniques. Next, we want to explore the security management process, which involves 6 steps: control, plan, implement, evaluate, maintain, and finally, report or document. The control activity is the first sub-process of security management, and this is the part where you organize and manage the process. This is the development of the Information Security Management Framework, which describes the sub-processes: defining the security plan, implementation, evaluation of implementation, and incorporating the evaluation into the annual security action plans. The control aspect includes all the policy issues and initiatives, as well as information security organization. Once all the information is in place, you can then begin to plan, actually defining the security section of the SLA as you consult with service level management and other team members, bringing in the underpinning contracts that are related to security issues, looking at the objectives of the SLA in security terms, also comparing security goals to the operational level agreements. This is all critical in the planning phase, implementing with service level management and service level agreements. The next stage or action is implementation, and this aims to implement all the measures that were designated in the plans. This means classification and management of IT resources, your personnel security, managing security initiatives, responsibilities, implementation, written instructions, handling of data media, providing input for change management, as well as access controls, implementing access and access control policy, maintaining access privileges of users and applications to networks, network services, computers, and applications. The next step is the evaluation process. If at this particular stage you find security holes or gaps in implementation, or areas that need to be revisited, you go back to the control phase and start over again. It's quite possible that you'll have an iterative process that goes to the evaluate stage and then goes back to control, then plan, then implement over and over and over until you get it right. There's 3 forms of evaluation that are done here: self-assessments, internal audits, and external audits, which are conducted by subjective third parties. Once the evaluation process is complete and you've approved the security management initiatives, you can then move to the maintain aspect or maintenance. This is the ongoing maintenance of the security aspect of the SLA and the organization. Maintenance is carried out on the basis of the results of the evaluation sub-process and the assessments and audits. If risks change due to changes in the IT infrastructure or in technology or in new vulnerabilities, you'll want to go back to the planning phase and implement new security controls. And then finally, one of the most important things is the reporting aspect. Documenting all reportable events, security logs, audit logs, results of audits, reviews, and internal assessments, as well as warnings, identifications of new threats, and specific reports for specific security incidences. You need to memorize this security management process. Control, plan, implement, evaluate, maintain, and report or document. As I previously mentioned, in the six-step process or the actions of security management, you're going to be highly involved with the SLA, the service level agreements. The service level agreement must define the full extent to which security is provided if it's provided in areas of the SLA. The security elements must be customer specific, not provider specific. It's the customer who ultimately determines the security policy based on their needs, based on their initiatives, based on their possible adherence to government standards like Sarbanes-Oxley or HIPAA. The security needs must be compared with the provider's service catalog. Then you do a gap analysis to find if there's areas that are not met by the provider. If that's the case, you need to go to third parties or contractors or consultants. That's when the negotiation process will begin. And finally, the operational level agreement, or the previously discussed OLA, will have a security section as well as the service level agreement. Finally, let's investigate some of the costs and possible pitfalls of security management. First of all, security is a very personal aspect. It really comes down to people. People are your weakest link. So it's going to cost money to have quality people at the organization and quality strategic partners, quality vendors, quality suppliers, quality providers. There'll also be a substantial cash outlay for secure software, as well as networking devices like Cisco ASA devices, firewall appliances, intrusion prevention systems, intrusion detection systems, and enterprise logging and monitoring systems. You may also have to pay to have a consulting firm come in and do a security penetration test and security analysis before you actually get to the planning phase. Remember, no security or poor security is going to have a cost in itself, a cost in lost production, a cost in having to replace software and data loss or damage. It could diminish the goodwill of your company. It could affect your relationship with customers, your reputation. It could make you vulnerable to legal action or government fines. A possible pitfall is just a simple lack of commitment. It takes a lot of time and money to stay up on all the new security issues, all the new security vulnerabilities. It's a living, breathing, ongoing organism, and it takes a lot of ambition. There's a lot of poor attitudes and human behavior, just basic laziness when it comes to security. Not following guidelines, poor password security, poor physical security. There needs to be some type of enforcement in place to make sure that end users, customers, and employees adhere to the written security policy and all of the practices and procedures. Another pitfall is a lack of awareness training or verification checks. It's one thing to do training and to put some procedures and access mechanisms in place, but if you aren't doing verification checks on an ongoing basis to make sure that the policies are being followed, then there's no follow-through. There's also the downside of having no change management service. Many organizations actually have some good security mechanisms put in place, but they have no change management. That's where itil comes in, and keeping track and keeping a database of all the changes in your system, making sure that you have updates and security patches of all your software and operating systems is critical. Another downfall is the simple lack of resources to go and introduce detection systems into your organization. Intrusion detection systems, intrusion prevention systems, firewall systems. And finally, there's a general over-reliance on many organizations on reactive techniques. In other words, waiting for the incident to happen, waiting for the attack to happen, and then reacting. Yes, you learn from it and make changes, but you need to be proactive and focus more like a firefighter on preventative measures. And preventing the fire instead of just simply putting out the fire. Again, 90% preventative, 90% proactive, 10% reactive. That's a ratio for success. In this final nugget of the itil series, we looked at 5 key issues. First of all, the big security picture, covering a wide variety of different terminology that are important for security management. We discussed security controls and different ways to categorize those controls. We looked at the 6-step security management process, as well as security and the service level agreement. Then we finished up looking at the cost and possible pitfalls of security management. Well, there you have it. Congratulations on completing the ITIL Nuggets series. On behalf of CBT Nuggets and myself, Michael Shannon, I want to thank you for choosing CBT Nuggets as your training source. It's been my pleasure and privilege to be with you on this journey to ITIL. And I want to wish you all the success in the future in your career, with the ITIL exam, and any other endeavor. If we can help you in any way, please contact CBT Nuggets at cbtnuggets.com. Thank you, and have a great day.